Something emotional happened on Sunday that most fans brushed off as just another NFL moment. But inside league circles, it raised eyebrows immediately. When Shedeur Sanders stepped onto the field for his first real NFL action, the cameras didn't just catch the throws, they caught his father. Deion Sanders couldn't hold back tears. He later admitted he was too emotional to even talk on the phone. That alone tells you this moment was bigger than a box score. And then Deion said something that changed the tone entirely. He talked about knowing the fight behind the fight, about things happening behind the curtains, not on the field, not in public, behind the scenes. That wording wasn't accidental, and NFL front offices noticed. Because while fans were focused on whether Shedeur played well or not, the Cleveland Browns were watching something much bigger unfold. Their season is slipping away. Their quarterback room is unstable. Their coaching staff is under pressure. And suddenly, a rookie quarterback with one of the most powerful last names in football is standing right in the middle of the chaos. That's when the whispers started. Not confirmed deals, not official talks, but quiet conversations. The kind that happen when organizations get desperate and start asking questions they'd normally never consider. Questions like, what if the solution isn't just the quarterback, but the coach too? It sounds wild at first, almost irresponsible, but timing changes everything in the NFL, and the timing right now in Cleveland couldn't be more volatile. Deion defending his son publicly wasn't just a proud father moment. To some, it sounded like a message, a warning, or maybe even positioning, because when Deion says they keep trying to make him out to be somebody else, he isn't just talking to fans or media personalities. He could be talking directly to the league. And once you understand what Cleveland is facing, why this franchise is running out of conventional options, and how one single performance could flip the narrative overnight, this stops sounding like clickbait and starts sounding like something the NFL might actually try. Because sometimes, the craziest ideas only surface when failure becomes the default. At first glance, it looked like just another chaotic Sunday for the Cleveland Browns. Another loss, another injury, another season drifting in the wrong direction. But buried inside that mess was a moment that quietly changed how people around the league started talking. When Shedeur Sanders was suddenly forced into action after Dillon Gabriel went down, it wasn't part of some grand plan. It was desperation. Injuries don't care about narratives. And just like that, a rookie quarterback with one of the most scrutinized last names in football stepped onto an NFL field. The stat line wasn't special. Shedeur would be the first to admit that. A few completions, an interception, nothing that screams franchise savior. But that's not what made this moment matter. What mattered was the reaction. Back in Boulder, Deion Sanders wasn't talking like a coach breaking down film. He was talking like a father who knew exactly how much had gone into that moment. He admitted he was in tears, too emotional to even take a phone call. And then he said something that immediately caught the attention of people who read between the lines. He talked about knowing the fight behind the fight, about things happening behind the curtains. That phrase changed everything. Because when someone like Deion Sanders chooses those words, it's rarely accidental. It suggests pressure that isn't visible, conversations fans aren't hearing, dynamics inside an organization that don't show up on broadcasts or box scores. And around the league, that kind of language triggers curiosity fast. Was Shedeur navigating internal politics? Was there tension in the quarterback room? Or was Deion hinting that this opportunity didn't come easily, that it was earned through resistance most people never saw? At the same time, Cleveland's reality made the moment heavier. This is a franchise searching for direction. Their quarterback plans have unraveled repeatedly. Their patience is wearing thin. And suddenly, a rookie with massive visibility is being handed meaningful snaps, whether the organization is ready or not. That combination, instability plus spotlight, is what shifted the conversation. Because this wasn't just Shedeur getting minutes. It was the Browns being forced into another evaluation, in real time under maximum scrutiny. And it was Deion signaling publicly that there's more to this story than fans realize. That's why this moment didn't fade after the final whistle. It lingered. And once it lingered, it opened the door to questions Cleveland wasn't planning to answer yet, about their quarterback future, their leadership, and how far they might be willing to go if this experiment suddenly starts to look like more than an emergency. Because sometimes, the moments that change everything don't look impressive at all. They just reveal cracks and possibilities at the same time. What makes this situation different isn't just that the Cleveland Browns are struggling again. It's how they're struggling and how few traditional options they have left. This franchise has tried everything. They've cycled through veteran quarterbacks. They've gambled on young prospects. They've traded assets, burned cap space, and reshaped rosters multiple times, all chasing stability at the most important position in football. And every time it looks like they've found a direction, it collapses under pressure. Right now, the quarterback room tells the entire story. Injuries have forced uncomfortable decisions. Confidence inside the building is fragile. And instead of clarity, the Browns are once again evaluating players in crisis mode, not on their own timeline. That's not how successful franchises operate, but it's where Cleveland keeps ending up. The coaching situation doesn't help either. When a season spirals like this, the coaching staff becomes a question mark whether it's fair or not. Front offices start protecting themselves. Ownership starts looking for answers that go beyond play calling. And suddenly, stability matters more than patience. Cleveland isn't just asking, who's the best coach? They're asking, who can stop the bleeding? That's what desperation looks like in the NFL. It's not panic, it's urgency mixed with exhaustion. A fan base that's heard every promise before. A locker room that's tired of resets. An organization that knows another failed rebuild could set them back years, not months. This is also why Cleveland is vulnerable to unconventional thinking. Teams with strong foundations don't chase spectacle. They don't need it. But teams stuck in cycles of disappointment eventually reach a point where the conventional approach feels pointless. When every safe decision fails, bold ideas start sounding reasonable. That's the environment Cleveland is operating in right now. They don't just need wins. They need belief. They need relevance. They need something that changes how players, fans, and even the league itself talks about them. And when a franchise gets to that stage, the conversation stops being about what's normal and starts being about what's possible. That's why even whispers, not deals, not negotiations, just whispers gain traction here. In a stable organization, those rumors die instantly. In Cleveland, they linger because the alternative is more of the same. And that's the uncomfortable truth. The Browns aren't desperate because they're reckless. They're desperate because they've exhausted the standard playbook. They've followed the blueprint everyone else follows, and it hasn't worked. So now, whether they want to admit it or not, they're open to ideas that would have been unthinkable a few years ago. That doesn't mean they'll act on them, but it does mean they're listening. And once a franchise starts listening out of desperation instead of confidence, the door opens wider than anyone expects. This is the part of the story that makes people laugh first and then pause. Because on the surface, the idea sounds ridiculous. The Cleveland Browns hearing Deion Sanders to coach his own son in the NFL. That feels like internet fantasy. The kind of rumor that pops up on message boards, trends for a few hours, and disappears. Except this one won't go away. Over the past few weeks, there's been persistent buzz around league circles suggesting Cleveland has at least discussed a scenario involving Deion, not as a consultant, not as a figurehead, but as a legitimate coaching solution tied directly to Shedeur Sanders. No contracts, no confirmed offers, but enough smoke to make people ask why this idea keeps resurfacing. Reports claim the conversations, if they happened, weren't casual. The rumored framework is extreme: massive money, top-tier coach salary territory, and an unprecedented level of control, roster influence, staff influence, and most importantly, full alignment around Shedeur as the future of the franchise. To be clear, none of this is verified. This is speculation, league chatter, not league action. But speculation only sticks when it fits a moment. And right now, the moment fits Cleveland uncomfortably well. The Browns are out of conventional answers. Traditional hires haven't worked. Veteran quarterbacks haven't stabilized anything. And the organization is stuck between needing patience and facing pressure that doesn't allow for it. That's how radical ideas gain oxygen. And Deion isn't just any name. He's box office, he's culture, he's instant relevance. Whether people love him or hate him, they pay attention. In today's NFL, attention matters more than teams like to admit. It drives primetime games. It drives jersey sales. It changes how players view a locker room. That's why this rumor feels dangerous. Not because it's likely, but because it's logical in a way Cleveland usually tries to avoid admitting. At the same time, the risks are obvious. The nepotism accusations would be relentless. Every decision would be dissected. Every interception would turn into a headline. And the margin for error would be microscopic. Which is exactly why people can't stop talking about it. Because this isn't a rumor built on comfort. It's built on desperation, timing, and the possibility that Cleveland might decide the only way out of its cycle is to burn the blueprint entirely. Most rumors fade because they don't make sense. This one lingers because, for the Browns, it almost does. And the longer it lingers, the harder it becomes to ignore the uncomfortable truth behind it. Sometimes the most unbelievable ideas survive not because they're smart, but because everything else has already failed. What separates Deion Sanders from every other name linked to Cleveland isn't resume lines or scheme preferences. It's leverage, cultural leverage, emotional leverage, and a level of influence that no traditional NFL coach could replicate. Most coaching candidates walk into a building hopping to earn buy-in. Deion walks in with it already built. Players listen to him differently. Not because he's loud or flashy or controversial, but because he's lived the exact life they want. Hall of Fame career, media scrutiny, pressure at every level. When Deion talks about accountability, players know it's not theory, it's experience. And that matters in a locker room that's been through constant resets and broken promises. That's the first major difference. The second is identity. Cleveland hasn't just lacked wins, it's lacked a clear sense of who it is. Systems change, philosophies shift, quarterbacks come and go. Deion doesn't bring a playbook first. He brings a culture, one that's unapologetic, confidence-driven, and demanding. Love it or hate it, it's consistent. And consistency is something Cleveland hasn't had in years. Then there's the quarterback factor. With Shedeur Sanders, Deion offers something no other coach can: total alignment. No mixed messaging. No developmental tug-of-war. No front office versus coach tension about the future at QB. The vision is unified from day one. That doesn't guarantee success, but it eliminates one of the most common reasons rebuilds fail. Critics call that dangerous. Supporters call it efficient. And here's the part people overlook. Deion has already proven he can manage dual roles. At Colorado, he's been a recruiter, motivator, CEO, and media lightning rod, all while coaching his sons without publicly losing the locker room. That doesn't mean the NFL would be easy. It wouldn't. But it does mean that he can't handle it. Argument isn't as airtight as people pretend. Deion also changes the math outside the building. Free agents pay attention. Young players pay attention. Primetime networks pay attention. Suddenly, Cleveland isn't selling hope, it's selling relevance. That matters more than fans like to admit. especially for a franchise that struggled to attract momentum without overpaying. None of this makes Deion the safe choice, far from it. But that's exactly why he's different. Every other option Cleveland could pursue is some variation of what they've already tried. Familiar systems, familiar processes, familiar outcomes. Deion represents a clean break from that cycle, for better or worse. And that's the real reason his name keeps coming up. Not because he's guaranteed to win, but because he's the only option that actually changes the conversation. In a moment where Cleveland needs direction more than comfort, that difference carries weight, whether the league likes it or not. This is the part of the conversation that makes even the boldest supporters hesitate, because no matter how you frame it, the optics would be brutal. If the Cleveland Browns were to bring in Deion Sanders with the clear understanding that he's there to develop his own son, the word nepotism wouldn't just be whispered. It would dominate every headline, every talk show segment, and every post-game discussion from day one. And the NFL is unforgiving when it comes to optics. Every decision Deion made would be questioned through that lens. Play calling, personnel moves, depth chart decisions. Even routine coaching moments would be scrutinized as favoritism, whether it was deserved or not. If Shedeur Sanders struggled, critics would say he was protected. If he succeeded, they'd say it was forced. There would be no neutral ground. That kind of environment creates pressure that goes far beyond football. Inside the locker room, veterans would be watching closely, not because they doubt Deion's leadership, but because NFL players are acutely aware of fairness. Trust in a coach hinges on belief that everyone is held to the same standard. Even the perception that one player has different rules can quietly erode buy-in, especially during losing stretches. And then there's the media storm. Every interception would become a referendum on the hire. Every loss would spark debates about whether Cleveland sacrificed professionalism for spectacle. The Browns already live under a microscope. This would magnify it tenfold. There would be no grace period, no, let it play out. The verdict would be demanded immediately. History doesn't help here either. The Browns have a reputation for headline-chasing moves that don't age well. Fair or not, that narrative would resurface instantly. Critics would frame this as another desperate gamble instead of a calculated vision. And once that storyline takes hold, it's incredibly hard to reverse. This is why even discussing the idea makes executives uncomfortable. It's not just about whether Deion can coach at the NFL level. It's about whether the organization could survive the noise long enough to find out, because the margin for error would be razor thin. One rough month could turn into a public circus that overshadows any progress happening behind the scenes. At the same time, that's what makes this dilemma so revealing. Cleveland is at a crossroads where conventional logic hasn't delivered results. Playing it safe hasn't protected them from criticism or failure. So the real question becomes uncomfortable. Is the risk of optics actually worse than the certainty of stagnation? Because if the Browns believe Shedeur is their future, and they believe Deion is the best person to unlock him, then the backlash becomes part of the cost, not a reason to stop. The problem isn't that the optics would be bad. It's that Cleveland has to decide whether it's finally willing to endure them. And that decision says more about the franchise than any rumor ever could. On the surface, the idea of Deion Sanders leaving Colorado sounds far-fetched. He's built something real in Boulder, total control, national relevance, a program that went from ignored to unavoidable almost overnight. He's not just the head coach there, he's the brand, the culture, and the gravitational pull. So why would he walk away from that? The easy answer is, he wouldn't. The real answer is more complicated. Deion has never operated like a normal coach. He's never chased comfort. He's chased challenges. Every major move he's made from Jackson State to Colorado came with skepticism, criticism, and people saying it couldn't work. And every time, he leaned into that doubt instead of running from it. That matters here. Because while Colorado represents success, the NFL represents unfinished business. It's the one stage Deion hasn't conquered as a head coach. College football is powerful, but the league is where legacies get locked in permanently. And if there's one thing Deion has always cared about, it's legacy, not just his own, but his family's. That's where Shedeur Sanders changes the equation. This wouldn't be Deion leaving Colorado for a random rebuild. It would be Deion stepping into a situation directly tied to his son's future. And Deion has never hidden the fact that everything he does is calculated to put his kids in the best possible position to succeed. If he genuinely believes an NFL organization is mishandling Shedeur or failing to fully commit to developing him, that becomes personal, not professional. Reports suggest Deion sees himself as both father and coach, able to separate the two when necessary. We've already seen him do that publicly. Pre-game, he's dad. Once the whistle blows, he's coach. That boundary has held at the college level, and Deion clearly believes it can hold at the next one. There's also the competitive angle that can't be ignored. Deion doesn't just want to prove he can coach. He wants to prove he can win where people say he shouldn't. The NFL is the ultimate proving ground. More politics, more pressure, more scrutiny. And for someone wired like Deion, that's not intimidating. It's motivating. That doesn't mean he's packing his bags. But it does mean he's listening. If the right call comes, if the right guarantees are offered, if the organization commits fully, not halfway, to a unified vision around Shedeur, the idea stops being crazy and starts being plausible. Because Deion Sanders has never followed the expected path. And he's never turned down a challenge just because it scared everyone else. So the real question isn't, would he leave Colorado? It's what would it take for him to believe that Cleveland is the next mountain worth climbing? This is where speculation stops and reality takes over. Because one game is about to carry more weight than anyone wants to admit. When Shedeur Sanders steps onto the field for his first real NFL start, it won't just be another rookie debut. It'll be a live evaluation under a microscope. Coaches, executives, owners, they'll all be watching not just to see how he plays, but how he handles the moment. And the moment couldn't be heavier. This isn't a clean situation. The Cleveland Browns are unstable. The season is already off the rails. The offense lacks identity. That means Shedeur won't be protected by momentum or optimism. If he succeeds here, it won't be because everything went right, it'll be because he made it right. That's why this game matters so much. If Shedeur struggles, the narrative will snap into place instantly. Doubters will say the pressure was too much, that the moment exposed him, that Cleveland still doesn't have its answer. And once that storyline takes hold, it becomes much easier for the organization to keep searching elsewhere, to delay commitment, to treat this as just another failed experiment. But if he shows something, not perfection, just command, everything changes. A few confident throws, calm movement in the pocket, a response after mistakes instead of retreat. Those flashes are enough to shift how people inside the league talk. Suddenly, Shedeur isn't just a name or a storyline. He's a real variable, a problem to solve rather than avoid. And that's when the ripple effect begins. Because if Cleveland believes it has a quarterback worth building around, the conversation upstairs changes fast. Coaching philosophy changes, patience changes, risk tolerance changes. Moves that once sounded reckless start sounding strategic. This is also where Deion Sanders looms without stepping on the field. Every throw, every reaction, every moment of poise will be seen as validation or ammunition, depending on who's watching. Fair or not, this game will be used as evidence in debates that have nothing to do with the final score. That's the reality Shedeur is walking into. One performance won't define his career, but it can absolutely define the direction of it. It can turn him from a contingency plan into a focal point, from a question mark into a commitment. That's why this game feels different. It's not about winning or losing. It's about belief forming or evaporating in real time. And once belief enters the equation, decisions follow quickly in the NFL, sometimes faster than anyone expects. Which is why this Sunday isn't just a start. It's a fork in the road. When you step back and look at everything surrounding this situation, it becomes clear that this story was never just about one game, one rumor, or one bold idea. It's about timing, belief, and how quickly narratives can shift in the NFL. For the Cleveland Browns, this moment feels like another crossroads. They've been here before, searching for answers, hoping the next move finally breaks the cycle. What makes this different is that the usual options feel exhausted. Safe hires haven't delivered. Traditional paths haven't worked. And now, a young quarterback with massive visibility is standing right in front of them, forcing decisions sooner than they planned. For Shedeur Sanders, this is bigger than a debut. It's about perception hardening into belief. One performance won't define his career, but it can absolutely define how he's viewed moving forward, either as another name in Cleveland's long list of what-ifs, or as a legitimate foundation piece worth committing to. In the NFL, that distinction matters more than stats. And hovering over all of it is Deion Sanders, not as a rumor, not as a headline, but as an idea that represents confidence, risk, and doing things differently. Whether or not Cleveland ever seriously considers him, the fact that his name even enters the conversation says everything about where this franchise is mentally. Because teams that feel stable don't entertain radical solutions. Teams that feel stuck do. That's what makes this so fascinating. This isn't a clear-cut decision with a right or wrong answer. It's a reflection of how the league values courage versus comfort, development versus shortcuts, belief versus fear of optics. And those tensions don't just exist in Cleveland, they exist everywhere. So the real question is whether this rumor becomes reality. The real question is what this moment reveals. Does it expose a franchise willing to finally take ownership of its direction, no matter how uncomfortable? Or does it show an organization still searching for certainty in a league that never offers it? And on the other side, does this situation say more about Shedeur's readiness, or about how hesitant teams are to fully commit to developing young quarterbacks under pressure? Because when coaches, executives, and fans look at this situation, they're really being asked one simple thing: what do you value more, safety or belief? That's where I want to hear from you. If you're Cleveland, do you lean into the risk and build around what you have? Do you double down on Shedeur and see where it leads? Or do you step back, reset again, and hope the next answer is cleaner than the last? Drop your take in the comments. Is this bold thinking or a disaster waiting to happen? And more importantly, does this situation make you question the quarterback or the league's willingness to believe in him? Because however this plays out, one thing is clear: moments like this don't fade quietly. They either become footnotes or turning points.